This is the story of a little boy who changed the world. Hudson was not an ordinary baby. He was a miracle, and there is no doubt that he was extraordinary.
We found out we were having a boy at the 18-week ultrasound, and at the time his anatomy scan was normal. 2 weeks later, our world forever changed. Hudson was diagnosed with many heart defects, also known as CHD. Hudson's little heart had aortic stenosis, severe mitral valve leakage, and a restricted atrial septum. Because of these conditions, the left side of his heart was large and stiff. Unfortunately, local hospitals were not able to help Hudson, and that's when the path to Boston Children's Hospital began. The doctors at BCH were confident that they could help our little boy, and that our hospital stay would only be a couple of months. Hudson was born on May 9th at 2:45 p.m. and weighed 7.5 pounds, which according to the doctors, that was big for a CHD baby. Prior to the C-section, they warned us that he may not cry when he was born and that he could potentially be very purple at birth. They also feared that Hudson's lungs wouldn't function properly due to his heart condition. We were so grateful that we heard those sweet cries when Hudson was born. That sound gave us hope and showed us our son was a fighter. Unfortunately, we weren't able to hold him right after his birth, as Hudson had to be cared for right away. The delivery room was crowded, but in a way it was comforting knowing so many people were present to help both Hudson and his mom. Hudson was rushed to the adjoining hospital Boston Children's for his first cath procedure at just a few hours old. In this procedure, they were able to place a balloon in his aortic valve and place a stent in his atrial septum. After that procedure, he had some ups and downs, but was stable. Even though the cath procedure was successful, it was determined that our sweet boy would need surgery. At just 4 days old, Hudson had his first open heart surgery. This surgery lasted about 7.5 hours long, and the surgeon was able to replace his aortic valve with his pulmonary valve, gave him a new pulmonary valve, removed the stent that was put in for his atrial septum, and then removed some EFE and also reconstructed his arch. After the nurses brought Hudson back to his room and had him settled with all of his medicine and wires, we were warned that his chest would be open and there would be a lot of pumps, wires, chest tubes, and more. I think both of us were still in a fog and really couldn't comprehend what they were telling us at the time. We didn't know what to expect and if we would be able to tolerate seeing our sweet son post-surgery. To our surprise, our eyes were glued to his open chest. We couldn't look away. We literally saw our son's heart beating. There aren't many words that we can use to describe it other than how amazing and complex the human body is. We had begged and prayed for our whole pregnancy to allow Hudson's heart to beat, and the Lord truly answered that prayer. Right in front of our eyes, we could see how amazing the craftsmanship of God is. About 19 days after he was born, while still hooked up to all of his machines and a breathing tube, we were finally able to hold Hudson and be able to see his eyes up close for the very first time. Hudson moved through his recovery at a soft pace over the next couple of months and was closely monitored with echoes, x-rays, cath procedures, and EEGs. After many cath procedures during his recovery, the doctors explained a couple options for the next steps in Hudson's cares. One option we were presented with was an experimental surgery that had never been done before. The only other option for Hudson was to move towards listing him for a heart transplant. After praying, hours of research, and much consideration, we decided to have Hudson listed for a heart transplant at 1 month old. While we waited for a heart, the doctors were confident that they could manage his sick heart with medicine. There were a lot of things that Hudson had to work on while waiting for a new heart. Hudson eventually was able to have his breathing tube removed, but it wasn't on the doctor's terms or in their desired timeline for Hudson. On July 1st, 2019, he decided enough was enough and somehow coughed his breathing tube out. Everyone was nervous since he didn't last long when they removed it the first time, but he persevered and was able to keep the breathing tube out. This is when Hudson started to teach us about resilience and how out of our hands his pace really was. Since he didn't have the breathing tube anymore, we were able to finally put clothes on him for the first time, started to hold him more frequently, and truly started seeing our little boy develop after living inside a hospital. After a stretch of a few weeks where Hudson was thriving as much as he could with his current situation, we received some unfortunate news that threw us for a major loop. We were informed that Hudson had developed some high-strength antibodies that were not present when he was listed for a heart transplant 5 weeks prior. The transplant team informed us that his body was creating these antibodies because of the conduit that was placed during his open heart surgery at 4 days old. In a sense, Hudson's body recognized the conduit wasn't his, and it felt the need to fight against it. Having antibodies meant Hudson's immune system was working appropriately, but it was actually going to affect him negatively in terms of receiving a heart. Now that he had developed those antibodies, the wait would be even longer, and the region for a potential match was even smaller. They also would need to do even more testing on a potential heart to cross-match it against those antibodies. There were a lot of different therapies that were administered to lower his antibody counts, and they were able to lower those counts from 98 to 61%. Those percentages meant that Hudson would have rejected 98% of the possible donors. So we were overjoyed when his numbers finally started moving in a downward trend. On October 7th, 2019, and after waiting 16 weeks for a heart, we received the best news for our little boy. It was time for Hudson to be blessed with a new heart. It truly was a miracle that a heart was a match for Hudson. With all of the good emotions that come with such big news, we knew it still was going to be a long road full of different fears and worries for our boy. Our family surrounded us in prayers and kept us occupied during the extremely long surgery. We are so grateful for our parents and their unending love for us, but also for their grandson. We couldn't have made it through any major surgery without them, especially Hudson's transplant. We also couldn't stop thinking about the donor family and how they had to experience the loss of a child in order for Hudson to live. We had prayed for them since the day he was listed and hope to someday pray with them in person too.
After his heart transplant, Hudson truly thrived. He was able to do many more things with a new and healthy heart. He started to sit up by himself. He developed a belly laugh that was contagious. He started exploring a bottle, started to receive feeds through his feeding tube, developed some motor skills, and he was babbling nonstop. Hudson spent 192 days inpatient at BCH and was finally discharged on November 18, 2019. We were finally able to take him home with us to our apartment in Boston as a family of 3 for the first time. Our hearts had never seen a greater joy before witnessing Hudson outside of the hospital. He was always a really happy baby, even in the midst of the valleys and the wars that he had gone through. However, seeing Hudson in a more homey environment, without all of the machines and constant interruptions, was nothing short of amazing. Around mid-December, Hudson's care team had decided it was okay for us to make the move back home. Our hearts were bursting with joy, but also fear at this major transition for our family. We arrived in New York just in time for Christmas, and this is where we spent the next 2.5 weeks as a family in our home. Little did we know, this was the only time we spent at home with sweet Hudson. Spending Christmas at home, gathering with our immediate family, and making memories outside of the hospital is a time we will forever be grateful for. The time at home went in the blink of an eye, and before we knew it, Hudson had started to take a turn. We made the trip back to Boston earlier than expected because something was off with our sweet boy. Towards the end of our time at home, Hudson had started to become restless at night, very cranky, and had a hard time being content when awake. And for Hudson, that was very strange and concerning to us. Even on the toughest days, Hudson had a huge smile on his face, so to see our son struggling was extremely scary. Upon arrival to Boston, Hudson was immediately readmitted and diagnosed with rejection. His body was starting to fight his new heart, and he needed medical interventions. It was only a matter of time before Hudson coded and required CPR. He was stable for a few days following that, but his care team was still puzzled as to why Hudson's heart was not well. The cath labs and tests showed no major rejection, but his sweet little body was telling us otherwise. Over the next few months, Hudson was in and out of the ICU with multiple scares and overall puzzling issues. After a while of remaining stable and Hudson's heart function remaining in a decent place, we were again discharged to our Live Forever apartment. We spent another few weeks out of the hospital with our sweet boy, dreaming of the day we could take him home with us again. Unfortunately, Hudson again took a turn for the worse, and our hearts knew it was different this time. We brought him back to BCH just in time because the next few days were absolutely awful. Hudson coded again upon arrival to the ICU for close monitoring, and this time he had not responded to CPR as well as he did the other times. Hudson ended up on life support, and our world turned upside down. Hudson had not only ended up on ECMO, but he also suffered a stroke at some point. A cath lab procedure showed severe heart dysfunction, the stroke, and potential coronary artery disease, which isn't usually seen that early post-transplant. Hudson was at war, and he fought to come off ECMO over the course of 13 awful days. Everything in us told Hudson would continue to fight, surprise everyone, and come off ECMO in a matter of time. After many meetings and gruesome days, our hearts knew it wasn't going to happen. It was time. It was time to make the loving decision to let Hudson go and be free of all the pain, wires, and medicine. It was time to tell him how much we loved him, how we were so thankful that God chose us to be his parents, and how proud he made us every single day. We spent his last few days making arrangements for our parents to travel to Boston to be with us and making sure that Hudson was comfortable. On the 275th day of being in the hospital, Hudson went to be with the Lord on April 17th, 2020, and that was a day we will never forget. We sang and prayed over Hudson, we read to him, and we surrendered him to the Lord. As we snuggled with him in his bed, and our closest BCH staff members joined our family by our side, we held Hudson until his very last breath. His passing was so beautiful, and it was a true testimony of peace that only God can provide. A year ago today, this world lost a beautiful soul, but heaven gained an incredible angel. Missing Hudson is awful, but honoring him has been easy. He was a little boy that changed lives and moved hearts more than we could have ever imagined. So many people have told us stories of how they learned from Hudson, deepened their faith, learned about strength and resilience, and blessed others in his memory. We even heard a story about a family who donated organs in his memory. Hudson left a huge imprint on our hearts and also in this world. He will never be forgotten, our dear son. Not a day goes by where we don't think about you, wish you were here with us, and wish that we could hold you in our arms. We will hold you in our hearts until we can hold you in heaven.